Good morning, everyone. I'm Christian Espinosa, the CEO of Blue Goat Cyber. I'm going to have the rest of the panel introduce themselves, and then we'll talk about cybersecurity and how it can be turned into a differentiator versus a challenge for you. So you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, Sean? I'll start with you.
Sure. I'm Sean Lavin from Alpha Lavin Advisors. I work with early stage companies, mainly on raising capital, but a lot of kind of building out the company and strategy. And so we look at this as well.
My name's Claudia Holy. I'm CEO and Managing Director of Podymos, which is a medtech marketing agency. We focus on how to clearly communicate the value of your technology at all stages of the commercialization. So this includes to investors, buyers at all stages.
Awesome. So today's going to be interesting because we're going to get the perspective of cybersecurity through an investor lens, messaging and marketing lens, as well as regulatory, which is where my organization falls in. And today, one of the challenges is cybersecurity is no longer optional. It's a requirement. And a lot of medtech innovators are still kind of like the hard way, figuring out that it's now a requirement. But it's no longer optional. And it can be a deal killer. A lot of investors have been burned because the innovator forgot about cybersecurity at the very end. And it's also something that is not just required by the FDA or MDR. A lot of hospitals and healthcare delivery organizations are demanding cybersecurity as well. So when it comes to marketing and messaging and figure out the roadmap, it's important to reverse engineer, because the FDA, for instance, the United States or MDR here, is like the minimum bar. But as you know, pretty much every major healthcare organization has been hacked and compromised, and there's been a big data breach. So they're becoming very sensitive about what types of devices can we put on their environment. And one of the biggest points of confusion from Blue Goat Cyber's perspective is what constitutes cybersecurity, what is cybersecurity overall, and what is a cyber device? Like, what types of medical devices require cybersecurity? So for the first question, what is cybersecurity? It's really about reducing the risk of somebody hacking into, either intentionally or unintentionally, into a medical device and causing harm to a patient. A lot of the attacks today that propagate the internet may just land on a medical device through the hospital network. So we want to make sure that that device is protected and it can't be attacked in a way that can affect patient harm. And then the other aspect to that is, like, what is a cyber device? This is where a lot of organizations wonder, is my device applicable to cybersecurity? A cyber device, to make it very simple, it has software and there's some sort of interface. The confusing part comes into the interface. Even if it has a USB port, that is considered an interface that could be used to connect to the internet, because I could easily plug a wireless adapter into that USB port. So first off, let's start with Sean and get some perspective from an investor lens. As you've seen the industry for quite some time, is cybersecurity starting to become a concern for investors, or are we still kind of behind in terms of cybersecurity?
I think both. I mean, I think honestly, it is slowly becoming a concern. And if 2 years ago it was 5% of companies thought about it in the startup world, it's probably 15 or 20% now, but it's still a long ways from everybody looking at it. I think companies learn about it kind of one of three ways. They either meet a company like this or come to a session like this and learn this way, or they find out when the FDA pushes back on something they didn't do, which is not a great way to do it, or they even later stage, if they got through the FDA a while ago and they go to sell product, a hospital or a hospital system says you don't meet our requirements or you need to make a change. And the latter two are, I believe, I don't know about more expensive, but certainly would take a lot longer and interrupt plans quite a bit more than if you do it early.
Yeah, and it seems like if I were in your shoes, I'm going to invest in a company, that I would want to make sure that they reverse engineered and figure out who their end clients are they going to sell to, the healthcare delivery organizations, and did they design the right requirements, not just from a overall perspective, but from a cybersecurity perspective, into that product so it can be sold in that environment as well.
I think you're right. And probably a fourth way companies learned is, investment funds invest in a lot of companies. So they if one of their companies runs into an issue, they spread that issue across all their companies. And so I think the funds are looking at this more, and they do want to be able to sell into all environments. And it's not just a U.S. hospital environment; it's a worldwide environment over time. And that I'm sure every country and every area is different. And I think one of the big questions for companies is, as you start with, what is a cyber device? I would guess that any company that's running an internet portal or some kind of AI-driven thing is going to understand they have a cybersecurity issue. Somebody who's making a heart pump that plugs into a computer once a year may not, or probably doesn't recognize they have a cybersecurity issue. And in the device world, there's kind of a digital health world, there's a device world. And the device side, we have more of the companies that have the occasional plug-in, and they probably don't think about it as much.
Yeah, and then I've talked to quite a few investors. I think there's still a little bit of a common, not just investors in the industry, I should say, misunderstanding that cybersecurity is about protecting the data. But from our perspective, being that's what we do in the industry, cybersecurity, the data is like secondary, actually. Really, we're interested in protecting the patient. Because if somebody can hack into a surgical robot performing surgery on someone's spine, we could paralyze that patient. If somebody can increase the flow rate on a drug infusion pump and somebody's getting morphine, we could cause them to overdose. If somebody can hack into a pacemaker or defibrillator, we could shock somebody to death, which you may have heard Dick Cheney had his wireless functionality a long time ago disabled because there's a legitimate threat somebody could shock them to death. So we look at it from the lens of, if somebody were able to break into this device, what is the impact to the patient, rather than from a HIPAA perspective or a PHI perspective?
And it's not an if. I mean, 10 to 15 years ago, one of the very large med device companies had their pacemakers hacked, and it was a problem for patients. Patients didn't know what to do. They knew there was a ability to change their pacing. It was a problem for investors. The stock went down somewhere between 10 and 20%, and this is a multi-billion-dollar company. So that was probably the thing that most med device CEOs or investors remember. And it's a real life issue. I mean, what do you tell a patient if their pacemaker, their ICD is potentially vulnerable, and should you take it out? Should you replace it? Should you do nothing? I mean, what does the doctor say?
That's an interesting dilemma, because if I'm a patient and I've got a recall on an implantable, do I decide to go ahead and get it taken out, or to accept the risk?
Certainly was. I think every patient, every doctor had a conversation about it, and some increased monitoring, some people have a pacemaker, and if it goes poorly, they're going to live and they have a decent pacing heart. Others are 100% a fatality if it were to stop. And so I think in that situation, I imagine each physician had to make decisions with each patient. And then there's also the issue of, can you find that patient, right? I mean, a lot of these patients are older. They may not use the internet. The doctor may have moved. They may see a different cardiologist. It's a real mess. And I would guess the majority of those patients had no idea they had a problem.
Right. And Claudia, from your perspective, being a medtech and marketing and messaging, what is your view on how cybersecurity has shifted, and in terms of like how we market our product and how you make the right claims? Like, what's your perspective?
So I think, we see this across all marketing. So whenever we're looking at marketing for medical devices, it's really, as you say, reverse engineering things. So we see that cybersecurity is becoming more important now. So actually, how do we understand what is important to the end user, and who are the end users who care about cybersecurity? So is it the investors? Is it the hospitals? And actually, what questions are they asking? Because that's then how we reverse engineer it to make sure that we're actually matching those claims as we go forward. And it comes down to a very simple sort of fundamental thing. It is about what questions and what issues and concerns do your audience have? And actually, how can we address those issues and concerns? Because if we don't address them, we're going to end up with an issue down the regulatory pathway or down the adoption journey. So it's really important that we map these stakeholders out. But as I say, we see this, it's coming up in cybersecurity now. And I think there is definitely a lack of understanding over what is a cyber device. So, it's how do we actually increase the awareness of that so that more early stage companies are really doing the work early on and not incurring huge costs and time delays later on because it hasn't been done. But I think the most important thing, it is about understanding what questions you're going to get and what objections you're going to get. And you are now going to get them about cybersecurity, and actually how you address them early on in your development cycle.
Yeah, and that's an important point. The whole idea is cybersecurity is supposed to be designed into a device versus bolted on at the end. Bolting on at the end becomes very costly. It causes delays. It frustrates investors. It makes the device less secure. So we're trying to, like, part of my company's mission is to raise the awareness that if you know you have a cyber device, you should be designing cybersecurity into your product versus trying to bolt it on at the end when your regulatory affairs person says, "What'd you do about cybersecurity?" Like, "Oh, we forgot about it." And that seems to happen fairly often.
I think there's another point to this as well. It's also, how do you communicate that you have addressed the cybersecurity issues too? Because I think cybersecurity, and we've recently spoken about this, and there's all this terminology that I don't understand. And, and actually, so, why should I understand it? But also, a lot of the people you're speaking to don't understand it either. So how do we simplify it so that actually we can communicate in a really effective way that we have understood all these challenges and we have addressed them in the technology that we're bringing to market, so that not only, whoever you need to talk to actually, you communicate effectively. So removing all jargon, keeping things simple, being really specific. I think that's also what we need to do in cybersecurity when we're communicating, so that people actually understand it well, because it's a growing area.
I'd ask, from the company that's building a heart pump, they're going to put 99% of their time into building that pump. What do they need to do on the cybersecurity side? So if they plug that console into a computer and internet once a year or once every 6 months, what is the requirement that they need to meet, and how often does that requirement change? If they meet it today, will they still meet it next year, or will it be different?
Yeah, well, it's continuous, right? I mean, vulnerabilities change all the time, and one of the things we have to do for our clients is, once the device is on the market, it could have a vulnerability profile. Like, we've accepted these low risk vulnerabilities as acceptable risk to the patient. But then if somebody develops a new exploit for that vulnerability and publishes it, and then everyone has access to this exploit, now it becomes very easy to take advantage of that vulnerability, which changes the risk profile. So it's something that has to be continuously looked at. And then from a design perspective, I agree with you. There's a functional designs. Let's make this thing work. Cybersecurity is really non-functional requirements. But they need to be included if you want to sell to your market, if you want to be able to have the right marketing message and all that. And what you said about the jargon is interesting, because that's a big challenge. Like, how do we simplify the message besides saying we're 99.99% secure? Because you can't ever be 100% secure.
Absolutely. It's specificity, isn't it? So if you say, you can say you're 99% secure, but what does that mean? Actually, how do you justify that?
Right.
So whenever you need to build trust with an audience, in the sense of actually, it's all about removing doubt and removing lack of information. So, what does 99% specific mean? So does it mean you comply with these ISO standards? Does it mean, it's just explaining that a little bit better, and actually what that means to the end user as well, so they can really understand it. That's what I mean by simplification.
Yeah.
So we're not using that sort of jargon, because I think whenever you use jargon as well, you really isolate your market, or you shrink your market down, because only a certain number of audience will understand that. So it's, how do we make it specific and action and understandable by all?
Yeah, well, in medtech and in combining medtech and cybersecurity, we've got like the most jargon international standards possible. I mean, I heard someone do an interview yesterday, and literally one sentence was all acronyms and ISO standards. Yeah. There's like no real word in there. So that is a major challenge, I think.
It's interesting. There's one thing, and this is just off on a little marketing tangent, but there's something called the curse of knowledge, and I don't know if anybody knows what that is. So basically, anybody who is developing a device, there's a scale of 1 to 10 about how much knowledge you have, and 10 is how much knowledge you have as an expert. But where would you think, and I'll ask you, Christian, where do you think people buy on that scale? If you've got a scale of 1 to 10, you know 10 about cybersecurity, what level do you think you need to put your literature out, or your materials out, your message out, for people to understand?
3.
Oh,
I don't know.
It's between 2 and 3. It's in between 2 and 3, but most people say 6. So actually, most people's information is way too high, and it's also people put too much information in immediately. So if you think of anything that you buy at any stage, you want to know different levels of information at different stages. So first, you might want to say, is it the right price? Second, you might want to say, does it meet my criteria? Third, you might want to say, what do other people think of it? So, you've got to deliver the information at the right stage. And what we're really bad at doing in medtech is saying, here's all of it. And actually, people can't digest it in that way. So it's also, with cybersecurity and everything, it's like understanding your buyer's journey, whoever that buyer is, if it's an investor, whoever, and actually what information do they need at what stage. So you simplify everything that way as well.
And I'd ask you, is for early stage companies that are thinking about this, it's very hard to commit to large amounts of money in the next 10 years. And most of these companies are working through the FDA, and we break that down, pretty clearly. Most companies expect they do some animal studies, they then do a first in man study, they do some kind of pilot or larger study, and then they do a pivotal study. Is there any way to, and that's pretty common across kind of all companies that are here, is there any way to kind of break down cybersecurity? And when you're starting a device, you should be doing these 3 steps. When you get to the pilot study, you should be at this point. When you're going to launch commercially, these things should be done. I don't know if that's possible, but
that's 100% possible. I mean, we're happy to have a consultation with anyone just to say, have you thought about these 10 things? And if they haven't, and most companies haven't thought about any of them. So you can quickly figure out where the gaps are and how to close the major gaps. So yeah, it is possible. And I think one of the challenges also, like you mentioned, I think you said sterility study or animal study, cybersecurity is iterative. I think in medtech, we're used to thinking of time blocks. Like, I'm going to do this study in Q3 of 2026. Cybersecurity needs to be done continuously because the software is being developed. It needs to be tested while it's developed, not at a certain point in time. Maybe at a certain point in time later on by a third party, but as part of that development process, it's got to be iterative. And that's something I think the industry as a whole has had challenges wrapping their heads around, because we're used to thinking biocompatibility study, this block of time, this study, this block of time, this study, this block of time. And cybersecurity doesn't work that way.
And the other thing I'd ask is there any way to develop, I guess, modules or software that can work on multiple companies? So we see that, if I go back 30 years ago with a heart pump, you had to develop your software to run that pump. Now there may be 5 or 10 companies with similar software where they've gotten it from one company, or they building different pumps that work differently, but the way the beat works or the whatnot with the software is the same. Is there ways to do that such that not every company has to do it individually and they can kind of scale together with security?
Yeah, we see that quite often where companies are using like a cloud platform that other organizations have used, and they have the ability to license that and then add their own unique functionality onto it. So they're leveraging something that's already been built. Yeah, but then we also have a lot of clients. We see clients that want to protect their intellectual property, so they don't want anyone else even understanding what their software does.
Makes sense.
So in what we see when we work with early stage companies is there's so many things that need to be considered in the early stage, and actually there's only limited funding that companies have. So at what stage? You said it's all the way through for cybersecurity. So what does what's the most efficient way to work in cybersecurity? Because I can say what it is from a marketing perspective, but actually, as cybersecurity is becoming so much more important, what's a really effective way for companies to start with cybersecurity if they haven't done anything yet?
I think there's a misnomer, we want to go too far, to the left on the timeline. Really, from my perspective, if you haven't proven your product and market fit and worked out your reimbursement strategy and all the things that really are critical to the success of this, bringing this to market, then you really don't need to worry about cybersecurity. But once you've validated your MVP and you've got a decent roadmap and a regulatory strategy, I think at that point you should start consider cybersecurity and, like I said, reverse engineer. This is the thing a lot of people don't understand. What market am I selling to? Am I only going to sell in the United States, or do I want to sell to China eventually because the requirements are a little bit different? If I understand my strategy, then I can reverse engineer. Okay, China requires these things. I can't use this certain cloud provider because it won't work in China, as an example. So I can design my system in a way that I can sell those markets without having a roadblock later on. So I think it's as early as possible. It's not just technical decisions. It's also forcing you to think, who are my actual clients? What are the markets like? And what are the regulations like from a cybersecurity perspective or any other perspective.
And so that's way more efficient doing it that way round than saying, okay, we're going to go for a product launch. We're 12 months out from regulatory approval or something like that, and we'll look at cybersecurity then.
Well, most people come to us about 2 months before they're trying to get cleared by the FDA or MDR, another global regulatory authority, and they've never thought about cybersecurity until the regulatory authority person said, they're going through a checklist. What have you done about cybersecurity? Like, oh, we haven't done anything. So they contact us, and it's an unfortunate situation because we hoped they would have talked to us earlier, but we always find lots of problems, and these problems they typically have to fix. And if you're giving a 2-month deadline to submit, and we find, let's say 500 problems, your software development team has to go back and fix those problems before you can have a buttoned up submission where the risk is low enough to get through the threshold.
And what would you say is the average number of errors that you do find? And I suppose it varies on the complexity of the device, all different things, but what's the average number of errors that you often find, just out of interest?
I would say the average number of high risk items that have to be fixed is per device is probably 50. Okay. We have some devices we find 5, some devices we find 5,000, but I would say based on the complexity, it's probably like 50.
And what's the average impact of that on the time to approval, the cost to approval, things like that, just so we can get a feel of what the implication of a late addressing cybersecurity is versus early?
Well, there's the financial impact, which is typically like 6 to 7 times more cost than if they would have designed the cybersecurity into the product, because oftentimes they have to reverse engineer and get a different software development team that actually understands it to develop secure code, and they have to do a lot of changes, which...
When you say a software team that understands it, that they've already had a software team that's developed their product. Mm-hmm. So what do you mean by that? What's the difference?
That's a good question, and that's another common misconception. Most software development firms do not understand cybersecurity. And when I talk to CTOs or CEOs of a medtech innovator, they assume the software development organization that they've contracted knows something about cybersecurity. And often they said, oh, we have a cybersecurity person on our team. But that has never, I would say maybe like 1 out of 99 times, 1% been legit. So that's the other thing. If someone talks to us early on, we can help them guide that decision on which firm to choose. Because there's a standard in medtech, it's called IEC 62304, which is for secure software development for medical devices. So I should find a software development organization that follows that standard, that has a track record, and they're probably going to cost more than one that's offshore, but at least you will have, it'll cost more upfront, but cost less overall, and you'll have secure software.
Yeah, so you've got it right from the beginning, and then you don't have to backtrack. So it's not just that it costs 7 times more later on because it's but it's the fixes, in the sense employing another team to fix it. It's all the time delays. It's all that sort of stuff.
Right. You have to find because if your team didn't know how they introduced the problems to begin with, your software development team that you hired, you're going to have to find a different team because they're not going to be able to understand how to fix it. And we could try to guide them as much as possible, but they have to do the fixes because we're a third party. So it's that. It's also the delay to market. So if you have a competitor and they did software development properly, their device may hit the market way before yours. So it's not just like the extra cost of redeveloping or fixing the problems, it's the delay to market. And then if you go back to your investors and ask for more money because you forgot about this, I imagine you're gonna be frustrated.
It doesn't go well, right? Any delay or any missed timeline, the next raise usually is at a lower value or doesn't go well. And I'll ask one kind of on the values question, because clearly most of the early stage companies are looking to increase their value, and it makes it easier to raise money, and they get their milestones. Have you seen, and they obviously want to be bought by a strategic at some point, have you seen the larger companies focus on this? I mean, when they look at who they may buy, have deals either gotten stuck because of cybersecurity, have higher numbers been paid because the device was ready to go in 5 countries? I mean, what have you, and I mean, are those large companies vocalizing this to the people they may buy?
they are starting to vocalize it more proactively, but from our experience has been reactive. Like they buy this company and then contact us and say, okay, we need you to look at the cybersecurity for this company. I'm like, okay, you've already made the acquisition. You know, so it's a little bit reactive versus proactive. But we're starting to see a little bit of a shift because at some point the pain gets enough where you've been burned enough times, you start to figure out, okay, maybe I shouldn't try this approach anymore.
If that shifts, I think more of the early companies will do more of this. If they keep buying them and then fixing it, the early companies will keep passing it on to the bigger ones.
Yeah. And then something you mentioned earlier, Claudia, was like how do we get the message the right way? And something you said, like, is it the patient that needs to understand the message or the risk? Is it the healthcare delivery organization? Is it the physician? Like, you know, how do we communicate the risk in a way, like, because I would think at least me, I don't think maybe most patients don't care, but if I'm going to get an implantable, I want to understand the risk.
Yeah. So I think this comes back to what problem you solve for the audience you're targeting. So I think you have to really look at, you know, who are you speaking to and what problem do they have? Because actually, cyber may not be a problem for them at that stage. So, you know, it might be a problem for investors, but actually patients might not be aware of it. However, you know, we're seeing a lot more cybersecurity issues. So actually, it's probably going to become more relevant for patients than it's ever been. But it's really, you know, what is their big problem? And addressing that problem for them. So I think it's, you know, it comes back to the clear communication, being specific, and also not hiding anything. And I don't mean hiding anything in the sense of you do it intentionally, but, you know, it's like, oh, we won't answer that. We'll answer that later. No, let's answer that in the best way we can now, because as soon as you answer every question, you know, if I ask anybody, you know, when you're going to make a purchase, it's the same as a medical device. Like medical device is clearly much more serious. But if you're going to have a medical device implanted or you're going to make a purchase, you know, you go through and you think about, right, you know, are all my questions answered? Am I certain that this is what I want to do? If that information is not available, you go, oh, do you know what? I'll come back later. And you don't. Or you go and look at a competitor or something like that. So I think, when we're talking about how we communicate about cybersecurity, first is this a problem that our patients really care about? And who in our stakeholders really care about it, and why do they care about it, which is staying curious and asking everybody, having patient groups, having investor groups, having physician groups, and saying, what do you care about? You know, a really great source of information once you're commercial is actually to ask your sales team, because you get all the information back from them, because they're getting asked these questions from clinicians every day. But once you know that, you know, then communicating it clearly, thoroughly, and understanding at what stage they have what issues. You know, for example, if I take a healthcare professional, I know this is when you're commercial, but, you know, to start off with, they might say they have a certain set of questions like, what does your device do? I've heard this from a competitor. And then once they get to evaluation, it's like, well, actually, how do I use it? Each stage is a different part of communication. And it's the same in any person that you're speaking to. It's just breaking that down and then giving the right bit of information at the right time. Because cybersecurity, I suspect, for patients will come in right at the end of their decision-making process, because it'll be like, I really like this, it's going to help me. I trust the surgeon, all these different things. And, you know, and yes, it's really secure as well, because I've heard cybersecurity is an issue. So it's really understanding that whole buyer's journey and where you need to put the information because of the problem they're having at that stage.
Yeah,
that was a long answer.
Sorry, I was going to add. I suspect that the doctor really matters. I mean, back when I worked as a surgeon, I don't recall patients saying to me, "I want this device or that device." They tended to come in and say, "What device do you think is best for me?" And I think the doctors care about this because A, they want what's safest for the patient, and B, if there is a problem, it's going to be their problem for the next decade when they have to fix it.
Can I push back on you
Sure.
a touch there?
Sure.
So what we are seeing is a big trend towards patients educating themselves significantly better than they ever did. And yes, it totally depends on the device. And yes, when they do go and see the doctor, of course, it's like, well, okay, you think this is better. But we're seeing an awful lot of self-education happening now. So I think that, and it's obviously with the rise of the internet and everything else. So I think there really is a place for being able to educate, especially on those.
It's 19 years ago as a doctor, so I'm sure it's changed.
But it also depends on the device, right? So some are much more patient-facing. So like, a sugar glucose monitor is going to be a much more patient-centric device, or a neurostimulator is going to be a much more patient-centric device than a stent. So it totally depends on that as well.
We saw that the diabetes community is very, very active in what they choose or pick.
Yeah.
So there's a big push for transparency and labeling, kind of like prescription drugs have all the side effects listed. With a medical device, we're supposed to say, these are all the cybersecurity risk listed. but I'm not sure if anybody actually, and this goes to patient education, actually reads that stuff or cares or makes a decision based on it, or is it like the physician, this is the only one we give you. You don't have any other options.
And I didn't know there were FDA labels before I got to Wall Street, so I don't think the patients are reading the labels. I think that's an issue. I mean, I think there should be a better way to let people know this is safe. I'm not sure what that way is, but I mean, the average patient's not getting the pacemaker label.
I would think, and this goes back to what you said earlier, Claudia, like in cybersecurity, we make it so complex with so many acronyms, with robot talk, as people have told me, that almost everyone just tunes out as soon as you mention the word cybersecurity. They're like, they just like want to go somewhere else, get away from the conversation. So it's a challenge to change that messaging so where people want to tune in versus tune out. And I think if we can solve that problem, then we'll get people more aware, and we'll probably make some progress with cybersecurity, not just in medtech, but other industries.
Why do you think that's the case?
What's that?
Why do you think that's the case? Why do you think people do tune out of those?
I think cybersecurity professionals in general want to be, quote, smarter than other people. I wrote a book about this, actually. So they want to talk over people's head, because if you talk over someone's head and they don't understand, it makes you feel smarter than somebody, your ego. So it's like this weird egoic thing where highly rationally intelligent people, this is the way they feel significant, is by talking over someone's head.
And it's really interesting because from a marketing perspective, that's totally the opposite of how we need to communicate. And actually, we try to make things simpler and simpler and simpler all the time. And actually, how can we use less words and be more specific? And, it's funny, isn't it? And so actually, we feel the smarter you are is the simpler you can talk now. And so we almost need to, just demystify cybersecurity as well. Because when we spoke recently, and I didn't realize a lot about cybersecurity, and I think I had all the same misconceptions. And then when you said any device that can be connected in any way to anything else is a cybersecurity risk, in the sense that it's got a USB, it's got any connection port. I was like, I never realized that, because I used to sell harmonic scalpel when I was younger and stuff like that. And that would have been a cyber risk because it had a USB port in the back of it, or any sort of connection port. So I think that made me lean into it a lot more, because I realized some interesting stories around it and actually how it affects so many different things and the impact it can potentially have on the patient.
Yeah. I remember reading a quote by Mark Twain. It said, if he had more time, he would have written shorter books, because it takes a lot more effort and energy to simplify the message, like you said.
Yeah. No, it's totally true. It takes more time.
Awesome. We have a few minutes for questions. If anyone would like to ask a question. Yeah. So if I understand your question, you're saying there's a push to say we need all these things in the software, but where's the balance of like having the right amount to pass?
Can I answer this?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I think this comes back to, if your engineers are saying we have to include this because otherwise, we're going to be missing something. And then your regulatory is saying, hang on, but this is going to really increase your regulatory process, which totally. I would always say, what does marketing say? And the reason I would ask you that is because really there's no point in doing any of this unless it's what your audience want. So, and obviously your audience might want loads of different things, and healthcare professionals might want loads of things, and patients might want loads of different things. But is there a way we can rank those things and say, actually, and also, what is the standard of care at the moment, and what is missing in that standard of care? Because if we can say, right, our whole goal is to get this out to patients as quickly as possible and improve outcomes. So if we can bring a device to market that is superior to the competitors because it has this and this feature, and therefore you simplify its development, it's all about what is going to end up selling in the end. So I think that's why I say, what does marketing say? Because it's really important to understand the end user primarily and rank, what they really want and how that fits in line with everything else in the market. Does that help, or is that?
I think that sounds like common sense.
Yeah.
You described it, and as always, a very...
Yeah.
Well, yeah, right sizing the design, not over designing. And common sense as a phrase is not common practice, right? So, but yeah, I think one of the challenges we see a lot of organizations try to over design and add features that are not needed to their product, versus say, in this release, we're just going to have this set with a roadmap to add more later. And when you add all these additional features and interfaces and interoperability, then you've got to have a lot more regulatory, a lot more cybersecurity. So we're always advocating, okay, what's the minimum thing that your customer, your client wants in your product? And let's get that out there, get some feedback, and then we'll design the next iteration later on. It's also much easier to get something with less functionality that's tighter designed, right size, through approval than something that's over-designed. Plus, it's more secure, typically. And I think we're out of time here.
Stop, unfortunately, but thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.